role can humanitarian supply chain play in the world of innovation and entrepreneurship?
Thank you very much for asking this fundamental question. Actually, my research over the last 10 years had been about innovation in Africa, and I did conduct some comparative case studies between Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa, and that laid the foundation for my next level of research, where I'm focusing on digital innovation. So your question is quite critical. It is happening at a point in time when I think presents the best opportunity for Africa. If you look back, the first industrial revolution, second, third, and now we are talking about the fourth industrial revolution. For me, and at the risk of sounding very optimistic, this is the best opportunity for Africa to grab this. So in answering your question, I would like to say that for the first time in the history of Africa, you are having very highly sophisticated cutting-edge technology being applied to the context of solving Africa's problem, unlike we've ever seen before. For example, as we speak currently, there are a number of innovations in humanitarian logistics supply chain, which relates to, for example, companies like cargo drones, zipline, and a host of many other robotics and also drone-related companies that are contesting if you like, the air transport system of Africa, and trying to help the African setting, if you like, to leapfrog the traditional infrastructure challenge or deficit that Africa is facing. So what they are offering, which I think is unlike anything we've ever seen before, is the fact that the transportation infrastructure is growing slower than the rate at which Africa is growing as a whole, and that a certain statistics that shows that Africa would require an investment in at least about 38 billion US dollars, for example, in order for the transport infrastructure to catch up, but they are offering an alternative way to engage with digital solutions, if you like. For example, in the context of humanitarian logistics, so these companies that I've mentioned, their names, they are offering that they would be able to airlift supplies in the form of a manned drone to deliver it to an affected area, for example. And Africa is no short of this humanitarian crisis. Some relates to war, some relates to conflict, some relates to famine, some crop infestations, and what you like. So what we're seeing is that I think the innovation that is going to come along these initiations, they are going to generate what I would call a critical mass of many other related kind of innovations, which is why it is so crucially important. So if you have, say, for example, unmanned drones or the flying donkeys and other forms of technologies airlifting health medical supplies to locations that we couldn't have reached otherwise. So you have to also imagine that there would be a number of other small startups that would help power these technologies. For example, you'll be talking about the Internet of Things, you'll be talking about artificial intelligence, and a host of many other innovations, if you like. So which is why I think it's fundamentally important that Africa takes and makes the most of this opportunity.
Thank you very much. It starts again. I'm going to finish here and come over. So that was, and what do you think? So it was was a lot. So I would say we try with a little shorter question. For example, what do you think is still missing in order to achieve these goals?
Okay, so I would reduce this to three key important things. So what is missing, or what is the missing link, or what are the challenges, if you like. So the first thing that I think is missing is the absorptive capacity for the actors within the supply chain network. So if you think about it, we're talking about the application of very high-powered cutting-edge technology to solve inherent problems in Africa. So the question then would be, like, at this point, Africa is presented with an opportunity to take leadership of knowledge creation in this area, because other countries in more advanced countries, because of legislation, are not able to allow for this testing, and it's now taking place in Africa. So the question then would be, like, do these actors have the absorptive capacity that when they engage with these very high cutting-edge technologies, to be able to reverse engineer, for example, a solution in the African context, or in other words, what is called globalization, which is the ability of these actors within the supply chain to be able to look at international scene, for example, understand the design at global stage and be able to apply it in the local context. Do they have that? So, and another point related to that also has to do with the distance in the knowledge domain. And what I do mean by that is that if what you are having is that most of these companies, they are only able to come and apply this technology in the context of Africa, and no one is able to fully understand or engage with them, then Africa would still miss in the opportunity to take leadership. Because what Africa needs to do at this point in time is what I call the co-created leadership, to be able to lead the way in co-creating the next body of knowledge that would power these futuristic technologies. Because what we're seeing with these technologies is just like you know, a tip of an iceberg. There's a lot more applications that could happen, but unless if the actors within the network, and I repeat that they shouldn't take what used to happen before, like a kind of passive role. They must take an active role in the knowledge creation, you know, that underpins the use of this technology. And then finally, the other point, which today in the conference had been also mentioned quite a lot, is the issue of legislation. So these technologies that we're talking about, they're quite matured, very ripe, and been applied in several respects, but now this is an uncharted territory. So the advanced countries, the legislation is not commensurate in terms of the speed at which the technology has advanced. But now the Africa, which is no short of a lot of humanitarian issues, and also has infrastructural deficit, they become like a kind of natural ally, a natural alliance, if you like. But the question then arises in terms of the regulations and policy and legislations in Africa. And while I think there is a lot that needs to be done, my take on that is that if the African governments have taken a very proactive role, they should be able to organically grow together with this technology. So the technologies are there, they arrive to be applied. There is need for application in the African context, but the underlying regulations that support them is not fully understood, so it's a gray area. So, but if the African governments and the actors within the ecosystem do not invest a lot of time and energy to it, then this mismatch and imbalance, if you like, would stay for a long time. So therefore, it is important that the African government within the entire ecosystem try to develop certain kind of framework organically and spontaneously, but also to be able to do it in what I would call a sticky way, so that, you know, when you engage with this technology, you should be able to, you know, stick together and be able to kind of grow together, if that makes sense. That basically is the main key point. So to repeat the three questions, three challenges, but I think it is entirely possible that Africa can overcome this. But it has to be, there has to be the will to do it, because this, I think, for me, fundamentally, like I said, at the risk of sounding optimistic, is probably the most important point at the crossroad that Africa finds itself, because the technology is there advanced and it just needed to be applied, and it cannot be applied in countries where it has been created. So some of the examples that I mentioned, for example, zipline, for example, cargo drones, flying donkeys. So most of these technologies, they've been developed and supported by Swiss-based kind of government. So, but it's now going to be applied here. Are we engaging fully with it? What do we need to do? So these are some of the things that I think are likely going to happen. Okay.
Was very nice.
Thank you. Really?
Thank you. Yes, sure. Of course.
Okay.